Today we're talking about the faith of millennials. Millennials are right now between the ages of 16 and 30. They're starting college, just graduating, starting their careers, and starting their families. It's an exciting time of life for them. But the number one complaint I hear from my generation about the millennial generation is that they're lazy, or that they're entitled, or that they don't even go to church anymore. Is that true? It's what we're talking about right now. Welcome to Right Now. I'm Jennifer Schuchmann, and today I have with me Nick Brandt. And Nick, we brought you in because you're a statistical expert in the No?
No, I don't know about statistical expert, Jennifer. It's far from it.
We brought you in because you are a millennial and you work with millennials. Yeah. And there's lots of statistics on the internet that we can go and we can read about if we just want to know in the abstract. But what I wanted to hear from you is, what are millennials really like? What are you hearing and what kinds of things that you do? And the reason we brought you in is not only because you are one, but you work with millennials. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so I actually, I'm a college pastor here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I spend my time working with 18 to 25-year-olds. So our college range with the church that I work at is actually focused on those that are in college, and then even a few age range that's like right outside of college as well.
And so what do you do with them on a daily basis?
Yeah, my life is revolves around several different things. So one, it revolves around discipleship and walking hand in hand with students who actually come to our church and spend time at our church. So I'm in the lives of a lot of students, for one, and young professionals. But another part of that is actually being on campus and being involved in the lives of people who don't believe and have a faith at all, and actually being invested in a relationship with them. I program quite a bit of opportunities and engagement, we would call them community groups, if you will, for people to kind of come together, and we want to create environments for millennials to have conversation and actually have this kind of conversation that we're even having today.
Cool. So it sounds like you not only have the ability to work with them on a large scale, large groups of them, but you also have some intimate knowledge and intimate conversations with some of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important.
So let's just start by talking about some of the I don't know, stereotypes maybe, or statistically what the analysts say about this generation.
Yeah.
You know, the things I'm hearing, like my husband will come home from work and he'll complain that they're lazy. They just don't work as hard as other generations. Or I hear a lot that people feel they're entitled. That they just feel like they deserve everything their parents had without really wanting to work for it. Is that true?
Sure.
Is that what you see?
I love to always ask the question when someone says, are they lazy? I say, well, do you know people your age that are lazy? And the same response will come back, and it's yes, that we do. And so I think, for one, part of the conversation that we hear in the media, we hear in the culture and the talking heads is constant, a negative tone around millennials. It's a constant negative vibe, a negative word. It is, you're never hearing millennials have done this great thing. This millennial generation is doing this. It's very rare to find the positive side of things. And so part of my view of society is very much believing that there's a slant negatively around it. Now, is that justified in some sense? Well, sure, but is it also justified that our economy crashed not long ago, and who was responsible for that? And so there's a lot of the same questions to be asked of all generations. And so to answer your question about misconceptions, I think we have to begin there. We have to begin from an overarching standpoint of there are a lot of overgeneralizations, there are a lot of stereotyping, and I don't think it's fair. And you'll find with millennials, they don't like that at all to say, hey, you're a millennial, because unfortunately, millennial in our culture today doesn't really have a positive tone. Yeah. But I want to be somebody, and I believe that our country needs to have a bunch of people, hopefully you and those that maybe even watch this, that would push the positive side of it. And I could list a lot of those things. So someone would say they're lazy, they're selfish, that they don't want to work, that they are know-it-alls, and I could probably come around that as well and say, well, let me show you examples of how they are not as well.
Okay, I want to talk more about that, because I don't want you just to put a good spin on it because you are one, but if it's really true, we need to learn that, because you're exactly right. It is one of those issues where we hear in the media all of the negative things. So stay tuned and we'll come back and we'll talk more about this. Welcome Welcome back. We're talking today about millennials, and we're going to get into talking about their faith. But before we went to commercial, you promised that despite all of the negative things we hear on the news, and even from people coming home and working with millennials, that there's some positive things too. Sure. Tell us about some of those.
Well, I think primarily we live in a society that can feel sometimes very heavy, very cynical, very, we are headed in the wrong direction. And so a lot of the tone, you turn on the, just turn on the news, right? Yeah. You turn on the news and you can't even walk out the door with feeling like you're heavy-hearted already because you just heard all the negative things that have happened. The positive side of this, and one of the best things about millennials, are that they're one of the most optimistic generations ever. In our country, and despite the fact that we will say that, man, that the economy is tanking, that the world's coming to an end, that there's terror threats everywhere, these people believe that they have a high sense of optimism. I actually read recently that I think it was like somewhere around 32% of them believed that they didn't have enough income, and yes, that was a negative thing, but almost 58% of them believed that they were going to be in that place soon, and they were going to have the funds that they needed, and so there's a sense of optimism. Yeah,
one of the things that I did some research on it as well, is that this group of kids is the first group not to do better than their parents. Yeah. They got out during a recession, they didn't have jobs, some of them, and they had higher student debt than any generation before them. And so they have more debt, fewer job opportunities, and so as a result, they're living, with their parents, and which nobody who's gone to college wants to do is move back in with mom. But despite that, they're more positive than any generation that comes before them, which, to me, in my mind, adds another layer of, wow, you have to be really positive to do that. That's incredible.
I think right now, especially, we just actually at our church got out of a series talking about this idea of more. And there's a book that came out called Abundance, Why the Future is Better Than You Actually Think. And it shaped a lot of our conversation, and our head pastor at our church talked about this. And the idea was that, why do we think that, why does everyone say that everything is going down? But in reality, even take for example the economy. Right. The economy crashed, and we were all worried that we were never going to make it back. Well, since then, we've earned almost every penny back and more.
Lost, yeah.
And so there's that sense of, are we too kind of short-sighted? Do we just believe that everything has to happen? And it's interesting thinking that way when you think of millennials, who are immediate thinkers and immediate instantaneous response people, but they have a sense that in the future it's going to be fine. It's going to be better.
So they're more chill about it than some of us old folks are.
Maybe it would take a couple conversations with a couple of millennials to calm us all down.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Do you have any other examples of things?
Yeah, I think, well, when you look at even the job market, I think, and we've talked about this before, that there's a sense of work-life balance and understanding that, maybe my parents, I've seen a lot of just the struggle with working too hard and working, overly working, where there was a detachment from family, a detachment from maybe an emotional, and a lot of millennials come out of, there's one thing that's real. They carry a lot of baggage. They carry a lot of baggage with them, even if it's with the church or even if it's emotionally coming out of a generation where there was more divorce than there ever was. Yeah. And so because of that, I think it's caused them to kind of look at, what am I doing with my life? Where am I going to go? And there's a lot of questioning, which can be negative, but can also be very positive, that you are thinking through things, that you are actually kind of determining, is this the best choice for me holistically, including a family, including the people that I spend time with? And I think that's a very positive thing. I think a couple other things, like the tech industry, for example. You have some very ingenious people, some of the greatest advancements currently that we're experiencing today. Things like social media, things that are helping benefit our economy and help bring it up. These are done by millennials. Yeah. This was created.
They're not created by old folks like us.
That's right. Yeah. So you have a strong sense of that, a strong sense of, when we get into things, even when we talk about, individualism with millennials. Individualism is a kind of a big idea that we're about ourselves. We kind of pick and choose what we want. We go, kind of like life is like an Instagram feed. We go through and we double tap what we like, we take what we like. Well, that can be really negative. It can also be really positive. It could be the fact that we don't have a very generalized, homogenous group of people in a culture, but instead we have a lot of individuals who look very differently and love to have their own sense of themselves. And what we're seeing is that play out in the workplace. We're seeing that play out in the country, in the creation of jobs, the creation of an economy.
So the fact that they have more choices in music and how they listen to it, like we only had records or we only had whatever, and they have more choices in how they do that, allows them to also have more choices about their life and the things that they're choosing for their life. lives, and maybe they're not as a group as homogenous, maybe as
Absolutely.
Some generations
Absolutely.
before them.
And you know, and I'm going to even go a little bit further for us, and maybe some of the people watching this, we're in the middle of political season, right? You know, some might think it's negative that they do not kind of side necessarily with. A lot of people think that maybe another misconception that a lot of millennials side wildly to the left, and it's not really true. They're actually much more independent. They believe, and rather than a two-party sort of split, there's a much stronger belief that, well, why can't we take something from here and create this? And so there's an option thinking mentality. It's not necessarily that A, B, and C are the only options, which may have been the past, may have been, we got to pick this way, but they go, well, what about D, E, and F? And this is brilliant creativity. This is ingenuity. This is a positive thing to think about, and it's going to be extremely helpful for our country.
Yeah, one of the statistics I read regarding politics is that the millennial generation tends to be liberal in their views, especially social issues, but fiscally conservative. Which I feel like as Christians, that's kind of where we need to be, right? We need to be offering, you know, health care to those who don't have health care. We need to do those sorts of things, yet we need to do it in a responsible fiscal way. And to me, that's brilliant, because so far we've sort of seen those things on opposite sides, and they're saying this could be one choice.
Well, and I think, as you saw in the last presidential election, back when President Obama was originally elected, you saw the power of millennials affect that through social media and through the effect that had on his campaign. I think you're going to see a lot more of that in this election. And again, I'm not very politically charged, but that said, I really do believe that you're going to see a lot of the reflection of the mentality, like you're saying, that you don't have to go one way or the other. We can kind of talk about meeting in the middle and seeing if we can meet something like that.
So we might look at them in our generation, maybe got together and did rallies or signs, or we worked for a candidate or something. They're at home on their phones when it looks like they're doing nothing, but they're actually a groundswell.
Yeah, another misconception that technology or the phone is a negative thing. You know, I think that look, you know, you talk to my grandparents, and they will tell you the TV was the devil, right? And the TV was the worst thing possible. But now we've seen the benefits of this, right? I saw a picture as we were thinking through this, you know, in our conversation. I saw a picture on the internet of a train car back about 20, 30 years ago, everybody reading newspapers. So everyone says, man, millennials are so disconnected. They're on their phones all the time. Well, was that any different from taking the train car to work in the morning and being on your newspaper?
Yeah.
I mean, did we ever really, have we always really had the problem of engaging with each other?
And that's another stereotype, right, is that we say the millennials don't read.
Right.
But like when my husband was getting Sports Illustrated, he said, do you want a copy of it? And my son's like, no. And he's like, well, I thought you'd be interested. He goes, I read it on my phone. You know, like he didn't see a need to have
what is this thing called paper here?
Yeah,
we don't
Why would I carry that around?
And we don't want to kill trees, Jennifer. Come on, we got to keep
environmentally conscious.
Right, environmentally conscious. You know, and that's the thing. Twitter, stuff like that. It's not all negative. It's not about. I think there's a lot of conversation of, oh, I don't understand this social media. Why are they involved in that? But you know, your feed now isn't just becoming about, hey, this is what I'm doing right now.
Right.
And it's a lot of, these are the people I'm following. These are the voices in my life, and you're seeing a very mixed group of voices that are coming into a feed, that they're hearing a lot of different sides, that they're not just sticking to one side, they're listening to both sides of the argument. A great example, and I'll finish on this conversation on this, is that of a misconception of social media. You know, we had recently, I think there was a baseball game, a Diamondbacks baseball game, and there was a bunch of girls in the stands, and they were taking selfies, and there was a sorority taking these selfies, and the broadcasters went on to just really publicly shame them, and just, it was almost so bad that it was funny because you had 14, 15 girls taking pictures, but they kept coming back and they kept saying things.
So the camera would come back and the announcers were talking this on the TV thing? Okay.
And it was almost to the point of an embarrassment for the station and an embarrassment for the organization that they ended up calling these girls later and saying, we're sorry, we're going to give you some tickets to come back to the game because we felt bad at what happened on a national scale, making fun of you. These girls, this was their mentality. Hey, I don't need to come back to the game. We would love you to donate those tickets to a domestic violence abuse center and help women who have been in a serious situation come back and experience a game that they may not get a chance to do that. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that they're not so self-absorbed. They're not all about themselves. They're using things like pictures, social media to benefit others and to be a voice of influence in their generation and try to make a mark.
Well, interesting you said that. I knew Instagram is a huge thing, and I'm not, I mean, I have an account, but I don't really use it. But one of the things that I see is that I have a 21-year-old son, as you know, who he looks at things differently. Like even this coffee mug sitting here, he would look at it with the camera from different angles, and what he doesn't really put words to, but what I see is he's looking for beauty beauty in the ordinary things.
Wow.
And so Instagram is some about selfies, and there's social media for that. But Instagram, one of the ways I see a lot of millennials using it is to show beauty in the ordinary, and to look for something that's maybe even more eternal, if you will. They maybe not be using those words, but they're looking for that sort of beauty at the deepest levels, and doing that with their photos.
There is a sense of transparency, and you get past the surface a little bit. People think that social media can be surface level, but I always ask, are you really listening? Are you listening to what they are tweeting out? Are you viewing what they are posting on Snapchat, Instagram? You start to really get a picture of somebody's soul, their heart, what they're trying to express of who they are. It can be a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, I have had occasions where I was on Facebook late at night and had a millennial private message me, and one confessed to some sexual abuse that had happened in their past, and one was just having some other problems. But for them, one of them was distance and one of them was close, but they probably never would have said those things to me in person. Like, there's just, how do you have a right time to do that?
Sure.
And somehow over social media, it was a way that they were able to communicate these really horrible things that were going on in their life to someone they thought could help. Without having to be face-to-face, and to do that. And to me, again, we're maybe quick to say, oh, all that's just a waste of time. It's not. It's how millennials communicate. It's how they share their deepest parts of themselves.
It is. And the real positive thing about that, to me, since we're talking about positive spins, is you have people who are trying to figure out how to share their heart, and they get to do that, and you know what? Guess who's following them? All their friends. All the people around them, they're seeing a little bit of that, and it can create a conversation. Now, the question still remains, are we still going to be people who engage each other face-to-face? Do we have these conversations, and how can we help them begin to see life goes beyond the screen? It doesn't have to be used as the all-eternal everything, but it can be just a launching pad, and there's so much more.
So like in everything, moderation. There has to be a good fit for that. So some of the things that we hear is that this group of kids is living at home, and I want to reiterate some things that you kind of swept by really quickly. Yes, the economy is a factor why they're back home, but one of the things that I read about was that they're also back home because they saw their parents' marriages break up, and many of these millennials have had 2 or 3 marriages. Their parents may have been married multiple times to different people, and they saw those not work out, and the breakups and the divorces. And so one of the things that they're doing is they're being much more careful and selective. Rather than getting married early, we say, oh, they're lazy, or they don't want to support somebody, or don't. Well, there's certainly some practical aspects of that, but part of it is they're just being choosier. They're being more careful because they want their marriages to last, because what they saw my generation maybe do. And so that to me is a huge positive for that, I think. And then the other thing, you talked a little bit about Silicon Valley and some of the work atmospheres have changed, where there's now some play at work. If you're going to spend this many hours at work, there should be time for play or exercise, or those kinds of things added. And one of the things that we've seen is dads, for example, getting time off when their wife has a baby. And those are things that the millennials brought to the workplace. Those weren't things that baby boomers said we need, and it's because they see the need for some of those things. Well, we were maybe absorbed working so hard. Yeah,
I think they say, you see in sociology that there's just swings all one way or the other. There's heavy swings, and we're shifting back away from a lot of that. That there's no longer this, first of all, 8 to 5 is out of the vocabulary. I mean, who works 8 to 5 all the time unless you're an accountant or something? Even then, we're learning that you can work at different times, and so there's a lot of flexibility in the work environment. It's a lot of how can we make this adjustable and work for you and your family. A lot of younger people working at home and learning how to be able to do that, and a lot of companies, like you said, that are focusing on how can we keep people around? How can we help them feel like this is even the culture in the office being a family, being something that they feel comfortable working in and that fits their mentality. So.
And I do see that a lot. I see a lot of millennials wanting to start something. It's not the corporate thing anymore. They're not looking for the long-term job. They're looking to do something on their own, and so that's where we're seeing some of the creativity that's happening in IT and some other fields is because that they're wanting to do that. I also see that, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit. I see that when they want to start ministries and things. There are existing ministries out there, but rather than join them, oftentimes they want to start their own because they see holes maybe in some things. So do you see that where there's this balance maybe where there's some wisdom from some of the older ministries and they're starting something out and don't really know what they're doing, or maybe there's a good thing there that they're starting something that...
Well, there is a strong confidence in being able to believe that you know, we're in a time where there are people who are making money off of posting YouTube videos, and anybody can get online and make some money via technology. And
my husband didn't realize this.
Really?
I'm like, there are people who go on there and that's their job.
That's their
they just make videos and get paid to do it.
Well,
so,
and that's a way that the work life has changed for a millennial, is that you see them actually figuring out ways that I don't have to be, I don't have to graduate college about 22 to figure out how I can start making some money or doing something that matters. And so to answer your question, I see that all the time. I know a young guy actually myself who he's part of our church. He's invested in the local body, but he saw a gap on his campus of people being able to have genuine conversation. And so he felt like everything I went to was overly programmed, overly just sterile, and it was like just forced. And he said, I want to create a place where we can bring people together, tear down some walls, and have a conversation. And I can bring somebody who's not threatened necessarily by a church or a faith-based mentality, and they can have a conversation about the things that matter. Because you'll find out millennials care about spirituality. It's a big misconception.
Yeah, one of the things that I saw is that they're more of them are against religion, or irreligious, I think is the actual technical term that they used, compared to other generations, but more of them are spiritual. So they've actually had to invent a new term called nuns, meaning that they're not associated with any specific church, but that they're still very spiritual in their life and their thoughts.
Yeah, what you see is, I think it's Pew Research said like 1 in 4 millennials are unaffiliated with a religious institution. But the thing that threw them off was that there was a higher rise when they asked them the question, do you pray daily? More millennials are saying than any other generation ever that they pray daily.
Wow.
So you have less of an affiliation with a religious institution, but you have more prayer. So you're going, well, what are they praying to? Who are they praying to? How is that happening? And what we're learning is that they have a desire. They're not just settling for science as the full answer or faith is the full answer, but there is this understanding across the table that I want to know about the soul, the heart, afterlife. I want to talk about things that are spiritual. I want to be able to do that. But what they don't like is to be attached to a religious institution. They don't like being committed to people. And that's a lot of what you'll see in the church now that is being pushed, is just helping people see that that's great, but the side effects of that are we have a rise in depression, a rise in anxiety, a rise in loneliness, because people, they're just kind of taking, kind of what we talked about earlier, the individualism. They're taking and choosing what they want, but they're missing the fact that, man, a lot of life happens in this community. So how can we say this is great, that you have a sense and a general understanding and wanting to know more about God and Jesus or whoever it might be that you're seeking after, but at the same time say that we want to get you connected to people, that life is meant to be lived, and I believe from my Christian worldview, life is meant to be lived in community, in relationships. God created us out of community for community.
Yeah, He is community.
He is community, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's true. I hear from a lot of people my age that, you know, their kids go off to college or they're started their job or whatever, and they're not going to church, and that really scares them. And what I hear you saying, if I'm not putting words into your mouth, is that there is a sense of spiritual thought and prayer and maybe even practices there, but it just may not be affiliated with, you know, something that we're familiar with. But the flip side of it is that they may be missing out on community in some ways. So how do we help them find that community if they're not wanting to be affiliated with?
Well, the first place, and again, I come from a Christian worldview, so the first place for me and for us understanding in the church is that we cannot get away from, you know, I tend to believe that Jesus is about as relevant as it gets. He's uber relevant, and
it's people, his followers.
Well, and people say, well, you know, the Bible's outdated. God's not relevant. Jesus is not relevant. And I'm going, no, Jesus is the definition of relevant, and He is not changing, and nothing will change from what He said. So, what I want to know, He has called us to do something. He's called us to evangelize, to tell people about what we believe is the greatest news for them, and then to disciple, to mentor, to help them follow the ways that He said will lead to life. Right? And so, in the church, I think we are trying so much to program around these things and make sort of events and things that maybe get past this. And I think, and I believe that the first place that we need to go is we need to tell the gospel for what it is. We need to point millennials to Jesus. Jesus is relevant. Jesus is the thing that they need, in my opinion, in my belief, in my experience. They need a relationship with Him. And when they have that, and when we are preaching that gospel, we need to walk around logical understanding, reasoning. We need to be able to have conversations. Days are long gone when we would say, the Bible says so, because the Bible says so. No, why does the Bible say so? Why can't we have those conversations and help these thinkers think about that?
I want to know more about how we do that. But we're going to take a break right now, come back, and we're going to find out more about doing this. welcome back. Just before the break, you said really the answer is Jesus, and I understand that. But if we're a parent of somebody who's not going to church, or the group as a whole maybe doesn't have the same affiliations with the church, how do they ever learn about Jesus? How do we introduce that? Is that something parents should get involved in? Is it their peers that'll tell them? What do we do?
Well, personally, I believe that if you're a parent and you're raising your children to grow up, and you're trying to teach them the ways of growing up and the best way for them to grow up, why have we stopped as parents believing that we need to engage in the spiritual lives of our children? I believe that we have to be involved in that conversation. And in fact, unfortunately, in the past, we tend to believe that the church is responsible for that. You're a pastor, you need to disciple and care for my kids. And as parents, we've taken a back seat. Let me just
I've sent them to the youth group.
Yeah, let me just ship them off to the youth group. And what we're missing is that's not what God ever called us to. God called us as men, as husbands, as wives, and families to engage together in the scriptures, to engage together in this conversation and not be afraid to have these conversations. I think that there doesn't need to be a forced push on it. I think there needs to be an open conversation. I think there needs to be ways that just starts to have and to open up those conversations and not be scared to have them. Inside the church, you know, I think it is important that we design and we think intentionally through everything that we do everywhere else. Why would we not design and think through the church and think through what are they coming to? What is the environment they're involved in? Do I think that we need to be focused so much on an attractional-based model? No, but I do think we need to ask ourselves, is this worth people driving to? Are we really giving and delivering something that's worth?
Those of us who are of a different generation, we need to not be afraid to have conversations. We need to ask the questions and be open, because we realize that the millennial generation might be open to other things. And if we're the ones programming churches, we need to take into consideration the kinds of things that would invite them in.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being here, and thanks for helping destroy some of the stereotypes that we had about it. Join us next time on Right Now, when we'll talk about something else that might just blow your mind and cause you to look at stereotypes in a new way.